as we call on the Supreme God, Goddess, Divine Father and Mother. We call on our souls and our divine selves. And we ask today that the session is for the highest good of all, for the expansion of consciousness and in service to humanity. So be it.
So be it. And so what happened next? What happened next on Earth was we moved from a place of establishing all of those things, and then we moved out of Taurus, and that happened around about when?
Around 2000 BC. Yeah, so if we take it very roughly in 2000-year increments, remembering there will be a period of crossover, and then as we're going backwards through the zodiac, we would have moved into the Age of Aries.
And that's actually the beginning of the astrological wheel, isn't it?
Yeah, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. But when we go because of the way precession works, we actually move backwards in through the ages. So we move from Taurus back to Aries, which is the first sign. Yeah.
Okay, so what was Aries about?
So Aries is a very different energy. Aries is a fire sign. So fire is very much about action and movement, and it's a cardinal sign. So it's initiating, starting. So it's ruled by Mars, the planet Mars, which is the archetype, the male archetype. So we've got a very different sort of energy with Aries. So Aries, the symbol for Aries is the ram. And so this was really an era of individualism, of conquest, of exploration, and of adventure. It's got very much a warrior type energy. So Mars the warrior. And in the age of Taurus, there was a little bit more, I guess, allowing of different ways of practicing, or different rituals, or different spirituality. There was different goddesses that were revered. But when we got into the Age of Aries, we entered an era of monotheism. So where there was, one god started to be. It was the demise of the goddess, and we had the god, as a male, and we saw the emergence more of a patriarchal society. And with Mars, we had conquest and war, and also you can think of maybe a bit Old Testament, the Age of Aries being a little bit Old Testament in terms of punishment and vengeance. These are the rules, and this is how things need to be.
What a stark
Um,
contrast to Taurus, hey?
Yeah, and that's not to say, one age is better or worse than another. Each has got their own light and shadow. So the light of Aries is this sort of exploration and this drive to sort of progress. And it was great empires were founded, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. So there was exploration and expansion. So it's not about good or bad. Both have light and shadow. But the themes you can sort of see during that time were very much about more patriarchal, more masculine, and more individual.
Okay. So um cue elevator music. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, sorry, Anthony, you're going to need to edit this bit. I'm like, where's my next bit? All right. Okay, so this might be a good point for us to jump into a little bit of spiral dynamics. What do you reckon?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. So, okay, do you want to introduce that idea?
Yeah,
Because
okay.
it'll go to the light and shadow. Because I'll say, it's all about consciousness, and we
Yeah,
can look at.
okay. So now we understand that we've got these different astrological these different constellations, and these different planets that are responsible for eras of time, and that each of them, because we live in because we live on Earth, and here one of the things that we contend with is duality or polarity. We have the pairs and opposites. We have light and shadow. Uh, so, so there's also another uh, way of looking at consciousness that became quite popular. A couple of decades ago, I think now, and that's a concept of spiral dynamics. And I know that you're quite well versed in spiral dynamics, and I feel like it's also an excellent overlay that we can speak to a little bit about how in time, but also throughout society in different, and I'm talking about global society, and we have uh, the consciousness operating at different levels all of the time. So, would you like to speak to a little bit about the spiral dynamics for us?
Yeah, sure. So spiral dynamics is a different concept to astrology. It's not directly related, but I think it goes back to the point that we discussed earlier, that there are different themes that may become apparent with astrology. That might be for the individual or for the collective, but the way that it plays out really depends on awareness or consciousness. And so you can sort of overlay perhaps different models of consciousness on that. One of them is spiral dynamics, which was, I think, developed in the 80s by Dr. Claire Graves, and then was further developed by Don Beck and Chris Cowan. And they came up with this model based on color coding, I suppose you could say. And there's sort of two tiers of consciousness, tier one and tier two. And the first tier is really divided into six colors, and it's a spiral. So it sort of moves around in a circle. Um, and so the first tier is beige, and that's really concerned with survival. And 100,000 years ago, we were very much about being just surviving. So that's where our consciousness was at. And then we move to purple, and purple is very much around security and tribe, and the rituals that we have about belonging. So we want to belong to a tribe so that we're safe, so that we have security. And then we move to red, and red, as each, I suppose, as we satisfy the need in each color, we evolve, and we're driven to grow. And so we start to then go, okay, well, I feel safe, I feel secure, I want to individuate, I want to express myself as an individual. And so that's the sort of red energy. And then we move more to blue. So blue is about, okay, well, if everybody's expressing themselves as individuals, that can be quite chaotic. And so how do we then create rules and regulations and order to sort of, that we can all kind of live together? And then we move to orange, which is very much around, well, how do I compete? How do I win? How do I progress? And then green, which is about consensus and agreement and community. So the idea isn't that we just sort of abandon one and move to the other. The idea, I think, of spiral dynamics is more that these different colors are called means, and that um, the next color sort of absorbs the mean that was below it. So when you get to green, you're sort of incorporating all of the other means as well. And then we move to tier two. And you could say that from the development of consciousness from beige to green could be like 100,000 years or something like that. And then I've read that that, well, there's a hypothesis that the leap in consciousness from tier one to tier two, the actual frequency leap, if you like, is as great as the leap from beige to green, except we're going to be doing that in a much shorter time frame. And so then when you get into tier two, you're sort of at this different frequency. And so there's the idea of yellow being this integral, interdependent level of consciousness, and then turquoise being about harmony and holistic, and even the idea there might be a coral level, which is where we're really into non-duality. So these are sort of very, very new, and where most of us are not at yet, as a collective, as humanity. But I suppose if you overlay like that as a model of consciousness, against, say, the template of an individual, which you might say that's an astrology chart, then how that chart may play out, or how that map may play out for that individual, would be different depending on where they're at in terms of consciousness. And our consciousness can change, like in our lifetime, it can, it can change depending on what's happening with us, what the events in our lives, and where we're at. So it's not a fixed thing. I don't see it as fixed. I see it as a movable thing.
Well, it's true, isn't it? I mean, when you think about the process of self-realization, the process of self-actualization, uh, when you're working with uh, frequency of light and sound, where there was a framework or a belief system or a program, or uh, however you want to describe it, DNA codons that were switched off, however you like to express that. That when when the time comes and that internal shift occurs, I know myself, and I'm sure lots of our viewers can relate to the experience of being, a moment ago I was this way and I believed that, and I was doing that pattern and that cycle and that thing, and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone, and my behavior is completely different. My mindset is different. My heart is more open. I'm holding more light. So yeah, so that's really what it means, isn't it? As we to change levels of consciousness, it may not happen in us, in like the whole of us doesn't change all at once, but there's these chunky segments that can just be different like that, and they have this ramification on everything else, and then that shifts, and so then the next thing, it's like your unconscious being, your super consciousness goes, tick, well done, now here's this bit, have a go at that. So for me, that's the way I've always sort of associated with the change of meme in myself. It may not happen all in one go. It can happen when you go through a rapid Kundalini awakening, or whatever you want to call it. It can happen really, really quickly, a lot. And when you're just, chopping the wood and carrying the water, doesn't seem like much is going on. And then all of a sudden, boom, another chunk goes. And your vibration changes, your heart opens more, your consciousness changes, and you take a step up the spiral of consciousness as such.
Yeah, and I think that also, again, it's not to say one is better or worse than another. Like, we want to be beige, we want to be able to look after our survival. We want to belong. We want to be part of a group. We want to be safe. We want to individuate. So it's like being all of those colors, all of those memes at the most aware level that we can be, and the most constructive way we can be. And if we've got one that we sort of disapprove of, or we say, oh no, it's not good to be read because that means you're being selfish or whatever, then we kind of get a bit stuck there. So we need to be able to embrace all of them at a healthy vibration, or with a healthy awareness, I think.
Yeah, yes, awesome. I agree. It's a bit like looking after your inner child, isn't it? It's a full-time job. Back to astrology. One of the other things that's come up in the subject matter a lot at this time is people are speaking to uh, their rights, and their sovereign rights and rights for choice on body autonomy. And so, I mean, we have that, you know, we have that as a globe. We're doing really well in some areas, and maybe bumping into some rough edges in others at the moment. Um, and so, one of the things that was brought up a number of times in all of the information that's been circulating and spoken to was the Magna Carta. So, can you tell us a little bit about the astrology of what was happening at the time that the Magna Carta was written? Where were we in the astrological uh, and astronomical procession, and what was going down then when that was written? That important document.
Well, actually, this sort of relates to something that's happened very, very recently, and some of you may be aware of an idea called the Great Conjunction or the Great Mutation, and this was something that happened on the 21st of December last year, 2020. And so, what this is about, it's about when two planets come to were Jupiter and Saturn, and
Oh, so one sec. Yeah.
yeah. Yes, so some of you may have heard of or might be aware of an event that happened last year on the 21st of December 2020, when two planets came together in what was called the Great Conjunction or the Great Mutation. And these two planets were Saturn and Jupiter. Now, before telescopes, um, there were only we only knew about the planets we could see with the visible eye, with the naked eye. And so the outermost planet was Saturn, and the second most outermost planet was Jupiter. So these were the two, big furthest away planets. Now they come together in a conjunction, and in astrology, a conjunction means when the two planets seem to be in the same place as seen from the Earth. So if you look out to the heavens, they look like they're in the same place. They come together every 20 years. So, that's fairly regularly. But over a 200-year period, they always come together in a sign which is in the same element. And so for the last 200 years, they've been conjuncting or coming together in this sign of in an earth sign. So one of the earth signs for 200 years. Then every 200 years they change element. So so it means that on the 21st of December 2020, they moved into the element of air, and this is the first time that that's happened for 800 years. And so when they come together as a conjunction, that's called the Great Conjunction. When they change element, that's called the Great Mutation. So we've moved element. So that's a big shift from earth to air.
That mutation is that um when you use that term, is that like a mutable sign? That means it's changeable. Is that right? Or am I
Um,
confusing the issue here?
yeah, sorry, the terminology is confusing. It doesn't mean it's a mutable sign. It's just called the
Okay.
mutation because it's changing element.
Okay, cool.
Um, Now, when the last time that they came together in air, when they were in air, there was the Magna Carta. So was created, and that was in 1215. And so, the Magna Carta was all about really a symbol of freedom from oppression. It was when the power had to be ceded from the king of England to some of the barons and to the people, really, to give them rights. So it was where power um, was sort of distributed and things became a bit more equal. um, and so, it became the foundation of the English system of common law, which a lot of countries have adopted as the basis of their legal system, and it's still sort of in place today, really. So it's like a charter of liberties and rights for the people, and that relates to air, the element of air, thinking. And how particularly Aquarius. So on the 21st of December 2020, these two planets came together at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And so that theme of liberation for the people and the rights of the people, and like you were saying, the freedom to choose, to have autonomy yourself over your body, is a very Aquarian type theme, to have the responsibility with the individual.
Okay.
So yeah, in that way, I can see that um, the theme of what has been happening recently in terms of that great mutation was reflected back in terms of, well, that was happening 800 years ago, last time we moved into air.
Now that's fascinating. So at that time, which was okay, so around the uh
1200s.
1200s, yeah, okay, so around 1200s. By then, we were well and truly out of Aries, weren't we? So when did we changed into we changed? We're so well and truly out of Taurus. We're out of Aries, and so at which point did we move from Aries into Pisces? Around what year
So
was that?
around 1 AD, so around the birth of Jesus and the birth of Christianity. So we moved into from Aries into Pisces. So Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. Remember, we're going backwards when we talk about these big astrological ages. And so we're into the age of Pisces, and that's the age we've been in for the last 2,000 years. Um,
And
yep.
what was Pisces about? Tell us about Pisces a bit.
So Pisces is a water sign. So water is very much about emotion. Um, Air is about the mind. Fire is about movement and action, and earth is about the physical and tangible. So we're moved into a water era. Um, and Pisces is symbolized by the fish, and very much Christianity has been sort of dominating these last couple of thousand years, really. And Jesus was said to be a fisherman, or the fisher of men. So with this sort of symbol of Pisces. And Pisces is the sign of Pisces is very much about compassion, love, forgiveness, at its highest level. So as we talked about, each if you think of signs as being on a spectrum, so there can be the constructive expression, there can be the less conscious expression. So at a constructive expression, it is about love and unity and forgiveness and compassion and kindness and an expression of creativity. Um, on a perhaps a less conscious expression, it can be about suffering and martyrdom and victimhood, escapism, addiction.
Right.
So yeah, so we can see the shadow playing out as well as the more constructive aspects.
So a little bit before the Magna Carta was created, there was a little epoch in time there where uh, the church, the Christian church really came into being. And there was a point there where, again, we moved from a type of a way of giving medicine, or a way of giving assistance in those capacities, which was there was, herbs and herbal tinctures and all sorts of things that were utilized, midwifery, and all of those different things were done much more on a local basis, in village to village. Or there was, people that maybe traveled small distances to uh, help a number of villages. But once the church came into its fullness, and the patriarchal consciousness was well into play, um, medicine became organized and orthodox. So I understand that to be around the point of the 1600s. Can you tell us a little bit about what was happening then? Because we had, and part of that shadow of things is where there was a lot of deaths, a lot of burning of witches, and all of that kind of thing. So what was going on in the planets and the stars at that point?
Um, so that's, the 1600s is quite a long time period. Um, but I think I'm trying to relate it to really what's relevant for today. Um,
Or the 16th century, it might have even been around the 1500s. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
At the moment, since 2008, we have had the planet Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. And um, Pluto is one of the furthermost planets from the sun. So technically, actually, it's not even a planet anymore, but let's just call everything planets. So Pluto is quite a long way from the sun, and that means it takes a long time to orbit the sun. So it takes roughly 250 years to make one revolution. So that means it will spend a long time in each sign of the zodiac that it's in. That in that way, it's a generational planet. And so from 2008 until I think 2023-24, Pluto is going to be in Capricorn now. And Pluto, mythologically and symbolically, is the lord of the underworld. Okay, so Pluto, the energy of Pluto is about power, is about transformation. It's about unearthing things, excavating things, looking at what's going on beneath the surface, so that we can be transparent, so that we can be empowered. Capricorn is a sign which is about structure. It's about authority. It's about tradition. It's about organizations, business, corporations, to name a few things. So, what we're seeing at the moment, since 2008, we saw in 2008 we saw the GFC, and we've seen the breakdown of some of the power structures and the societal structures um, that we live by, you know. And in the 1500s, Pluto, well, if we go back to when one of the times when Pluto was in Capricorn previously, it was in the 1500s, and this was a time when the power, as you said, was held by the church, and um, that was sort of the ultimate authority that was Rome, and that started to become challenged. It was challenged by the King of England, Henry VIII, who challenged that and said, well, I want to set up my own church because I'd like to get divorced and marry Anne Boleyn. But it was sort of a power.
King Henry.
But who's the most powerful, the king or the pope? That was what was being challenged. Well, why should I listen to the pope? I'm the king. So challenging the power of Rome, and then also the Protestant Reformation. So Martin Luther, he challenged that as well. So these were like sort of huge challenges to the prevailing authorities of the time, and we're seeing that. We've seen that since 2008. Now, in our current environment, we've seen a lot of things being revealed, a lot of secrets that have been revealed, a lot of ways of that corporations, that banks, that the church, with the sexual abuse that was going on, that's been revealed and brought into the light. This, the inquiries into how banks work and how their finances work. Pluto is also very much um, concerned with resources, so money being a resource. So these are all being exposed. These are all being brought to light, and we can see that challenge to power happening today, as it was in the time that you mentioned, in the sort of 1500s.
And that's another interesting thing that occurred in the 1500s. There's a bit of action that went on there. Um, another thing was that the Gregorian calendar was adopted by the Catholic Church in the late 1500s. So that was another major structural change
Mm.
that happened in the world. And one of the things that I understand the difference between the previous style of calendars and the Gregorian calendar were that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and if you don't know the answer, it doesn't matter either, it's fine. The Some of the older uh, civilizations like Egypt, again the Mayans, they operated off a 13 moon or 13 month cycle. And then when we got to the Gregorian calendar, things changed, and it was almost like there was a cycle dropped. So now, instead of having a 13 moon calendar or 13 28-day cycles in a year, we've gone down to 12. That was one of the major shifts that occurred in the adoption of that calendar. And the moon, yes, I believe represents the feminine. So it seems, we've moved out of that feminine consciousness. We're well and truly into the masculine consciousness. So how does that relate to astrology as well at that time? What shifted in Western, how we know astrology or Western astrology today?
Um, I don't really know what shifted at that time, around the time of that calendar. I have looked at uh, how time has been measured in terms of calendars, and like you said, ancient societies would use the moon, and the moon cycles. Um, but they'd also use the seasons as well, which is really dependent on the sun and the movement of the sun. Well, actually, it's the movement of the Earth around the sun, which means there's a variety in heat and light, and that's what creates our seasons. And so I think what happened with the creating this calendar was that if you keep using a lunar calendar with the 13 lunations, you actually get out of sync with the seasons. And so this sort of the calendar that we use today is sort of a mixture of both. I think we still sort of semi follow the moon cycle by having a month. We follow the sun cycle by having a year, but none of them are actually exact. So we have to sort of we're roughly following a moon cycle, but they don't
That's
correspond to our months.
about as
Um,
easy as squaring the circle, really, isn't it?
yeah, and some cultures still do have lunar calendars, and actually, we see ourselves as quite scientific and logical, but our days of the week are named after planets, the seven visible planets. When you go back to that, our months are really structured around moon cycles, even though they don't correlate exactly anymore. Our year is based on the path of the Earth around the Sun, and so we're actually following that in a I suppose a slightly compromised way to make it sort of fit. But even our festivals and our site they still do follow a lunar pattern. Like Easter is a lunar festival, so that's why it changes every year. No one ever knows when Easter is because it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox. So um, yeah, so I don't actually know, what the exact astrology was in terms of what was happening with the Gregorian calendar, but I think that we are a little bit more in tune with the cycles of the moon and the sun than we think we are, even though we're not exactly following them.